So, quick introduction to ourselves. I'm Jake, and my co-lead here is Gabe. We run the Milwaukee developer user group here, so that's who we are. If you want to reach out to me, I'm on Twitter as well. Gabe, anything you want to mention about yourself other than that you're a TA?
No, I'm on Twitter too. My handle is just at Gabriel Roll. So if anybody wants that, I'll drop it in the chat at some time in this call. And no, I don't really have that much to introduce about myself.
Today we're going to get a presentation from OwnBackup on the 7 steps to recovering lost data using Salesforce's Weekly Export. And our presenter is going to be Varun here. He's an enterprise solutions architect at OwnBackup. And I'm going to let Varun take over now.
Awesome. Thanks, Jake. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Please let me know when you see it. Are you able to see it?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So today's presentation, we're going to be talking about the 7 steps to recovering lost data using the Salesforce Weekly Export. Just to introduce myself, my name is Varun Prabhakar. I'm a solution engineer at OwnBackup. And prior to OwnBackup, I was a Salesforce developer. So I personally know the pain points of dealing with an organization's data, making a lot of those mistakes and having to recover and not having a sort of backup plan in place. So really data loss, it can happen. We took a survey in Dreamforce last year. And out of all the scenarios that cause data loss, they said 49% was human error. And we have some integration errors, migration errors, and bad code. As a developer, I think we can even argue that bad code is also grouped up into human error, right? The thing to note here is that Salesforce, they're responsible for your uptime, but they're not necessarily responsible for your data if you make some sort of error. The ways you can back up your data. Out of the box, we have the weekly export. A solution that I used when I was a developer was to export that into a data warehouse. This does work, but from a functionality point of view, it's basically the same as the weekly export, right? You just take a carbon copy of your Salesforce environment, and you're putting it into an external database. And really, there's no way of telling whether or not the new backup, the latest one, is correct or not, right? So from a functionality point of view, it's the same thing as the weekly export. Sandbox refresh. This is an interesting one. I never really considered this a backup, but ever since joining OwnBackup, I did realize that some of our prospects, they invest in a whole new sandbox environment just for backups. So they would have one full sandbox for their development needs and another one just for backups. And so we know these are expensive. And finally, data recovery service. So Salesforce has an option to recover your data, but you end up paying $10K just to get that data back. So the 7 steps to recovering using the weekly export. There are a lot of steps, but OwnBackup we've really condensed it down to just 7. First of all, you have to size the damage. Then you have to isolate the missing data, create, restore CSV files, build an external ID, prepare deleted records, insert those records, and then finally we have some additional considerations. So let's start with sizing the damage. This is really all about understanding your data model. So, let's say an account executive comes up to you and says they've deleted their accounts. Yes, you can use Data Loader. You can upload those accounts, no problem. But you know your schema better than anyone else. You know that when you do delete accounts, there's a lot more that's involved, right? By default, contacts automatically get deleted. Then there's opportunities. There are all these custom objects. Depending on the size of how complex your schema may be, there are a lot of other records that were also deleted when that account executive deleted accounts. Next up is to isolate the missing data. So you go to your weekly export, you have a ton of CSV files, and now you have to sift out, once you go to the account CSV file, now you have to sift out the missing accounts. You could run an upsert, right, with just a full data set. And yeah, inherently you will recreate the missing accounts. But the problem with the upsert is you're also going to be updating the already existing accounts. And the issue there is, let's say you pulled that weekly export on Monday, you notice a data loss on Friday. You're now backtracking your already existing accounts, and you're losing all your work from Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So that's why you can't just run an upsert on the full data set. You need to sift out which are the missing records. Then you have to create the restore files. This kind of goes hand in hand with the previous step, in that now you need to create a separate CSV file for just the missing records. And these are all separate CSV files for each object as well. So one CSV file for the missing accounts, another one for your contacts, another one for your opportunities, another one for all the, and then of course, a separate CSV file for each custom object. Finally, create an external ID field. So the way we would go about this restore is you would want to, inherently when you do insert records back in Salesforce, you're giving them a new Salesforce ID, all right? How do we maintain those relationships? A good way to do that is to actually create an external ID field in Salesforce, let's say in your account, so that you can map the old Salesforce ID. So that way, once you do insert the account records, they'll have new Salesforce IDs. They'll now have a tracker for the old Salesforce IDs. And then when you start inserting the child objects, you can now tie the Salesforce IDs, or like at least the parent IDs in the CSV files, to the newly created records. So this step is basically creating that external ID field in Salesforce. Finally, prepare the deleted record file. So just going into your, for example, account file, switching the column from ID to the newly created external ID field. And this is where you start the insert. Now, something to take in mind during the insert is the order, right? You can't just insert contacts first. You have to first start at the top of your hierarchy and then work your way down. That way you are able to preserve those relationships by first gaining the Salesforce IDs of those newly created parent objects. So first you have to start with accounts. Then you start inserting your contacts and your opportunities and all those custom objects. And we can do this via data loader. So start off with the account insert, mapping your fields. So we would map the column with the Salesforce ID to the newly created external ID field. And then after that, you would then insert your child objects. Some considerations to take into play here. For starters, records with multiple parent objects. This is alluding to junction objects. The most common case is campaign members, right? In order to restore your campaign members from the weekly exports, you first have to restore your leads as well as your campaigns. If either of those parent objects are not inserted, your campaigns won't successfully be restored. Polymorphic field, that's also something you have to take into account. A good example are the task object. Excuse me. The task can be related to an account, it can be related to a contact, it can be related to anything. And you have to make sure you insert those appropriate parent objects before you can insert your tasks. Then we have intra-object relations, so accounts that have lookups to other accounts, right? You can't just get away with one run of data loader for accounts. You may have to do different account restores depending on how deep that lookup goes, right? You have one account looking up to another, and you'd have to start at the top of that hierarchy. And finally, files and attachments. So this really depends on what version of Salesforce you're on, right? If you're in Lightning version, in order to restore the attachments, you'd have to do it through the multiple parents, right? Because you have the joiner object, the content document link. Or if you're in Salesforce Classic, it's a polymorphic field because they're related directly to the parent object. But there are easy options available. One of our clients, Multnomah County, before I get into OwnBackup here, one of our clients, Multnomah County, they did use the weekly export to recover data. Accounts, contacts, opportunities, not a big deal, right? It does take some time to maintain those relationships, but Multnomah County's data model was so complex, it took their Salesforce admin 80 hours, 5 weeks to just restore their data. After that, they became a client of OwnBackup, and they were able to use our processes to really reduce that time. So what is the benefit of a platform like OwnBackup? In essence, time is money. We're all developers here. Any time we spend having to restore is time that we cannot be spending on writing triggers. As a developer, we are expensive resources. So it's in everyone's best interest that there is a method to easily restore in the event of a data loss, so that the developers can be working on the other Salesforce initiatives. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a quick demo of OwnBackup. OwnBackup has several pieces of functionality. The ones I'm really going to highlight are how we're going to be able to recover from a data loss scenario instead of using the weekly export. And afterwards, I'm also going to show you our Sandbox Heating tool, only because we're developers, and this personally was one of my favorite pieces of functionality that really helps with my dev efforts. So going into the OwnBackup platform, we are an external web application. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my production instance right here. Now, remember, the first step is to identify the data loss and kind of understanding your data model, right? And really isolate, and of course, isolating the records. So what we can do here is I can scroll down to this graph. And this is where your Salesforce admin, your developers, they're really going to monitor the behavior of your records across all your standard and custom objects. So if I know there's something going on with my accounts, I can filter on accounts, or I can choose one of my other objects. How I'm going to read this graph is, let's say I wanted to filter on what's been removed. What this does right here is it shows me that at this point in time, 64 accounts were removed from my Salesforce org. Clicking into that data point will take me to the very backup where that data loss occurred, right? So OwnBackup, just taking a step back, the way our product works is we take a daily backup of all your data and metadata. So when I clicked on that point, it takes me to that very backup where that data loss occurred. So this does a lot of the first few steps of the weekly export right here. It tells me that 64 accounts were removed, 97 were changed. If I were to filter on removed, it's going to show me all the objects that were removed from that data loss scenario. So this is really all about knowing your environment, right? I could start a restore job at the contact level. I could start it at the opportunities level. But similar to the weekly export, you want to be starting at the top of your hierarchy, because that's the first object that you're going to be restoring. So I'm going to go ahead and start a restore job at the account level. Now, what this is going to do is it's going to process a restore job. And what I mean by process is it's going to give me a representation of all the objects that I'm about to restore, right? So not just those 64 accounts, right? I'm also showing you here, I have some contacts that were also deleted. I have some opportunity records that were also deleted. My particular schema, I have all these custom objects, which all have master details to each other. And OwnBackup is able to recognize that when we are about to restore those 64 accounts, we also need to restore all these other objects. So unlike the weekly export, where we have to go and restore one at a time, as long as we restore with the top of that hierarchy, we're able to automatically detect all the child objects. Something to note here, not only do we detect the objects through master detail relationships, we also do objects through lookup relationships. So for example, right here, I have this particular tech request object. It says 95 tech requests are going to be reassociated. These tech requests, they have a lookup to contacts. When the accounts were deleted, they also deleted contacts. These tech requests stayed in Salesforce. They're just kind of floating in Salesforce space with a null value in their lookup value to contacts. We're able to actually recognize that when we do create these new contacts, even though they're going to have new Salesforce IDs, we need to repopulate that lookup value for tech requests. Finally, the other thing you can do here is, let's say you were going through and cleaning up your Salesforce environment. You have a lot of duplicates. You realize that out of these 64 accounts, you only need to restore just one or two. Majority of these accounts actually need to stay deleted. What you can do here is you can filter on this object. Several ways to do it. One way is to upload a new CSV file with just the accounts that you want to restore. But as a Salesforce developer, I know you guys are going to like the SQL where clause. So I can say only restore the account where name is like Acme. Hit save, update preview. And what that's going to do is it's then going to re-render my preview to only display that one account I want to restore, plus all the related objects in master detail and lookup relationships. And then from here, now that I have a good understanding of what I want to restore, I can go ahead and start my restore. And that right there is the restore process in a nutshell, right? With the weekly export, we said 7 steps, but really depending on the number of records you're trying to restore, plus how complex your data model could be, 7 steps is a huge underestimate. It's going to be way more than 7 steps. With OwnBackup, we kind of do a lot of the heavy lifting for you. As we take our backups, we're maintaining all these relationships because we're backing up all the IDs as well. And so that way, when we do present this preview for you, it does maintain all the parent objects with all the child objects. And then finally, we can restore everything in one fell swoop. No need to restore just one at a time. So that's our restore process. The other thing I mentioned, actually, before I go into Sandbox Heating, we're really here to discuss the weekly export, the differences between that, how we can restore from that, how we can restore with OwnBackup. Any questions on this restore process here?
I think we're good. I don't think there's any questions.
Yep, sounds good. So the other feature I really wanted to show you guys was the Sandbox Heating feature. One of my favorites. It would really help out any developer. Reason being, you're building out a trigger, writing out a Visual Force page, really building a batch class, anything really, you're going to be doing in your dev environment. And the problem with doing it in your dev environment is you don't have data. As a Salesforce developer, what I had to do was I had to create data in order to test out my code. Yes, this works. The problem is a lot of times I'm not able to test out some of those edge cases that don't arise until I push my changes to either a UAT or production environment, right? So there's a lot of back and forth. Once I push the changes to UAT, something arises and I'm not able to replicate it in the dev environment. So now I have to manually create the data in order to replicate that one particular use case. Just like I said before, time is money, right? Any time that we're spending creating this data, that's time that we're taking away from our dev efforts. So what the Sandbox Heating tool does is, the idea behind it is to take a subset of data from your full or production environment and actually push it into, or replicate it into your developer environment. So let's say I'm doing a trigger on contacts. I'm going to start off with contacts as the root object. From here, I can branch out either up the chain or down the chain. So from contacts, I wanted to add accounts. I have a lookup to other contacts. I'm going to go to those contacts. If I have anything above accounts, I can keep going above to this DNB company. And as high as you want, if there are more and more relationships, you can add those as parent objects. Finally, on the other side, I can also add as many child objects as I want. So let's say I want to add campaign members. Now, as I mentioned before, right, campaign members, in order to be successfully created, you need to include both sides of the parents. So I have included contacts, and we're actually able to recognize that we also need to add campaigns. So we're going to add the appropriate 4 campaigns in order automatically for you. So you don't have to actually select it. And then finally, I can go case it, and then I can continue down the chain, all right? As I'm building out this schema, I'm actually pulling in the records from Salesforce real time. And because I'm getting this data, I'm actually able to give an estimate of how much data I'm going to be pushing into my destination environment. And so as a reminder, this is more of a reminder for you to say, hey, I don't want to go past my 200 megabyte limit for dev, 1 gig for dev pro, 5 gig for partial. And then finally, the other thing to note here is anonymization. A lot of times we're not given access to a production environment because your client doesn't want to share the sensitive information. Fair enough. With this tool, what the client can do is they can set up, they can actually anonymize this data that they're about to seed here. So they can choose what we call an anonymization template, which is just a mapping of all the fields in a particular object and how we want to anonymize them. So for example, Varun Prabhakar will be anonymized to John Smith. Phone numbers, social security numbers, email addresses, they will all be anonymized to values that actually look like phone numbers and emails, but of course they can't be tied to any individual person. So once I've created this whole data schema, I can then go ahead and choose my destination service. And from there, I can start seeding. So now your developers, you guys, you have the proper data in your developer environments necessary to test out your code so that now you can do your due diligence in your testing before promoting the changes to the UAT environment, right? It reduces the need for that back and forth promoting the changes, finding a bug, coming back to developer environment, and then going back and forth. So, I mean, really with that concludes my demo. Any questions for me on either of the tools I've shown you?
I actually have a question.
Yep.
Are you able to take data that's in a sandbox and push that to production with your tool?
So we used to be able to do that. We have actually two sort of sandbox seeding tools. Our old version had that capability. The new version, which I showed you with building out the templates, we kind of restricted that ability because we want to discourage that, right? In no way are we an ETL tool, right? So
yeah, the only reason why I asked is because there are applications out there like CPQ and FSL where you configure with real data and you push those things into typically a production environment. And I was just looking for a way to take that data that we've populated, typically we do that in a sandbox, and push that into production.
Okay.
That's the reason why I ask, because there actually is a valid use case for that flow.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, we have seen that as well, which is why we still have our old version of the sandbox seeding tool available for that very use case. It's just, it's not as robust as this new one where we're actually, I'm showing you how we can actually build out the templates. The old one is just pick a parent and automatically get all the child objects, while this new one that I just demoed here was allows you to filter on the child and pick parent objects. It's it just works a little better.
Yeah, I would typically probably like to make some kind of template for the information that I want to pull.
Yeah.
Cool.
Another common question I actually get is, can these jobs be scheduled? Currently, no. Reason being, it's just like my previous answer. We kind of want to discourage the idea of using this as an ETL. There are better tools out there for that purpose. So this is mainly for getting that small subset into your developer environment, as opposed to having some sort of constant sync.
Gotcha.
Great. I mean, if there aren't any other questions, thanks for joining us. We actually are on backups. We're doing a little raffle for all of you guys that have joined this this demo. Go ahead and navigate to ownbackup.com /2020 Milwaukee Dev and enter for your chance to win a free pair of AirPods. Thank you for joining.
Thank you. Thanks, Varun. I actually added the link in the chat. And Jake, if you don't mind sharing that link with the others that weren't able to join today,
I will.
we'll be able to give them a chance to win the AirPods and take a look at the video. We could announce the winners by next Monday morning.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, once I get this video up, once I get it downloaded, I'll get it moved out there and I'll share it out.
Yeah, appreciate that. Thank you.
Cool. Right. Thanks, everyone.
And thank you for presenting.
Yep. Thank you all.
Really appreciate it. Yeah, thanks you guys.
And yeah, that's all we have today. So thanks again to OwnBackup and Varun and Eddie there. Thanks thanks again, and look forward to maybe hearing you from again next. Eddie, when did you say you have another presentation for the?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. The next presentation that we have out for another virtual event is with on June 11th. It's going to be a very similar event, similar topic that we're going to cover on that day.
Cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But yeah, feel free to join if you're available.
Cool. Thanks for coming, everyone.
Thank you.
You learned something.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Be safe out there.
Later, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.